Yep, so hi everyone. My name is Amanda Beales and I'm the SEO Team Lead at Resignal. And I'm here to talk to you today about PDP discoverability and how you can use technical SEO to help you win in search, shopping and LLMs. So I've got quite a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so we're going to get stuck straight in. So PDP discoverability has always typically relied on getting the basics right. Now, I'm not going to talk through all of these things in a ton of detail because hopefully everyone is aware of some of these initiatives, but things like having descriptive titles and content in place on your page, using proper indexation and canonical rules, the use of basic product schema and all the necessary attributes that come with that, competitive pricing, which isn't something we can really control in our job roles, but is definitely something that we need to be aware of. And then finally, the flow of brand and domain authority throughout your site through those lovely offsite trust signals that hopefully your digital PR teams are building. But in 2026, it is no longer enough to just get these basics right. And we are seeing even mature e-commerce websites with these fundamentals in place, struggling with things like inconsistent visibility within the SERPs and organic shopping grids, missing rich results and featured snippets, and also poor LLM inclusion in relevant chat retrievals. So what's changed? Well, I'm going to take you on a very quick whistle-stop tour of all the major changes that have happened in the last 2 or so years. And we are going to start with in-SERP filtering. So if anyone is unaware of what this is basically the shift in the SERPs from where you can basically search a query. So in this example, I'm searching for a barbell, and you get almost this like faceted navigation style setup on the left-hand side. When you use those filters, it then appends this to your search term and filters the results accordingly, very much like a category page would. Now, this is very prevalent in the US at the moment, not quite so much in the UK, but as we know, things always roll out there first. This is no doubt coming in full force to the UK SERPs very soon. Now, not long after this started to ramp up, we also saw the launch of product variant schema, and this was just another telltale sign that the SERPs were moving towards more of a product focus. Now, the next thing is AI overviews, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking this is definitely more informational than commercial, but in the last 6 to 9 months in particular, we have seen triple-digit growth for AI overview coverage in the SERPs for commercial queries, usually below the fold, but definitely on that SERP landscape. So this is definitely something to be aware of in terms of your product discovery. We also had the rollout of organic shopping grids. Now, again, this is not something that was particularly new at this time, but it was the first time that we saw these grids moving from the shopping results tab to the all results tab. And now these are out in full force everywhere within the commercial landscape. We also had the rollout of AI mode, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then not long after, we saw GPT users every month surpass 800 million. This was a huge milestone. And actually, as of March this year, this is now at 900 million. So this is continuing to grow. We also saw the very first agentic checkout launch at the sort of back end of 2025. This was the buy in ChatGPT functionality, which basically allows users to purchase the product directly in the LLM. And then, not to be outdone by OpenAI, in January of this year, we saw Google launch their version, which is the Universal Checkout Protocol. And this basically allows you to do the same thing in the SERPs. So this means that the user can complete their full purchase journey without ever having to visit your website. Now, if you're active on LinkedIn, you might have seen the recent chatter about Gemini moving into Chrome. This has actually been rolling out since January, but again, hasn't quite made it to the UK or EU markets just yet. And we've also got the pending move from AI mode into core, which we know is going to happen. We just don't know exactly when. So it's safe to say that all of these changes have completely impacted the way that products are discovered and served back to users. And therefore, the risk from your PDPs not being discoverable has never been higher than it is now. So I'm going to talk you through a few technical optimizations that you can make on your product pages to ensure that you win in all of these areas. And we're going to start with structured product groups. So this is essentially the move from crawlers understanding products on your site as a single product page to product systems, and it's done through the use of product group schema. So product group schema, what is it? Well, it's basically markup that provides additional context to crawlers about the products on your website and how those variations link back together. And it's done within one single overarching product group. Now, the typical variations that you might have are things like size, color, and material. But if you were, say, a company selling candles, you could also use this to mark up scents. And if you were selling consumable goods, you might use it to mark up things like flavor. So it can be quite versatile. There are many benefits of using this type of variant structured data. The first being that it helps to establish better relationships between the product pages on your website. So this helps to reduce duplication issues that you might see from crawlers and also cannibalization issues that you might get between different products that exist on your website. Now, this helps with eligibility in merchant listings, aka organic shopping grids, and it also allows users to filter directly in the SERP on those products to pick what variant they want, and then when they click through to your website, they'll end up on that variant and be able to add it straight to their basket. And finally, it helps to improve long-tail search coverage. So because your variants are now able to rank individually whilst having that relationship built with the parent, it means that your products can now rank for more long-tail queries with higher purchase intent and therefore users that are much closer to the point of conversion when they enter your website. So there are a couple of types of variants that you can have on your website in terms of structure. The first one, and this is probably the most common and definitely the most preferred by crawlers, is a single page variant. So in this instance, say you have the example of a Lord of the Rings book. On this product page, you would be able to use filtering options directly on the page to pick what option you want. So you could choose between a paperback or a hardcover, for example. Now, these clickable elements would dynamically change the URL on that product page through the use of parameters, and these parameterized URLs must be canonical back to the parent product. So you only have one canonical URL that sits within your product group. Now, if you have a website that has product pages split out into completely different pages, so in this example, we've still got the Lord of the Rings book, but on this one, you've got the paperback as one unique product page and then the hardback as a completely separate product page. You can still mark these up with variant schema, but in this instance, both URLs would have their own canonical tags, and then there would be no parent URL within your product group because that link distribution would be split equally between your variants. So to see this in action, we've got an example here from Under Armour. Under Armour have a very good product group schema setup. On the left, you'll be able to see that we've got the parent SKU there and it's got a fixed URL. And then when you apply a variant of, say, size and color, the URL will be appended to include those variations through parameters, but will still be canonical back to that main parent. And all of that data is stored within the structured variant code. So what this means is that when a user would search for this product in the SERP, they would get this nice organic product grid, and then they would be able to filter between those options directly in the search results, that when they click on the option that they want, they will land exactly on that variant and they'll be able to add it straight to their basket. It also means that they have more chance of appearing as the primary purchase solution in the bottom right corner. So if you are a seller that has multiple retailers that also supply your products, you'll be competing to be this sort of first purchase solution. If you have the proper markup on your site, you have much more of a chance of appearing there. But if you don't, you might end up losing that position to a retailer. So some key things to do to make sure this succeeds as well as it can. The first thing is to make sure you dynamically alter any information on the page to match the variant. So if a user is clicking through to that variant URL, they should be able to see their drop-downs pre-selected for the option that they've requested, and imagery to reflect that, and obviously pricing as well. It's also really good to make sure that your variation schema contains that level of markup. So if you've got a variant marked up for the color black of a product, you would expect to have that color appended in the title and the description too. And finally, it kind of goes without saying, but just make sure you nail your best practice for your product schema, because otherwise this isn't going to work as well as you would like it to. So on to point number 2, this is going to be talking about sort of the consistency of your product identity on your website and how you should be saying the same thing everywhere that your product appears. So this is particularly important for organic shopping grids, and there are 3 primary first-party data sources of retrieval for information to fill these product grids. The first is the information that you put on your product page, so the actual detail that sits on that page in the hard code. Then we've got the structured data, so the schema markup, which hopefully you're using product groups if you've got variations. And then finally, the data that you submit directly to Google through a merchant feed. Now, all of these things should ideally be saying the same thing, because if they don't, then you're probably going to have some problems. Now, if you are a brand that also has retailers stocking your products as well, then crawlers will also use that information from those sellers across the web to populate this information. So if one of those retailers has better markup than you do, or more information and more consistent information, they're more likely to get used as that primary source of information on the SERPs, and therefore they're more likely to get that top primary purchase placement instead of yourself. So having consistency builds trust. So if you had those 3 areas on your site, so your product page, your markup, and your feed, and you were saying different things in different entities, then crawlers are not going to know what's accurate, they're not going to know what to trust, and they're therefore less likely to use your information and rank you accordingly in those grids. So the cost of that inconsistency can mean suppressed rich results. So this could be either through your products not appearing at all, through someone else taking that primary spot, or through inaccurate information appearing on that grid because the crawler has gone to a third party for the information instead of you. You might also get shopping disapprovals. So merchant feed is obviously used for paid ads as well. If you have mismatched information in your schema and in the feed, you might get shopping disapprovals, and then it might affect your paid ads as well as your organic free listings. And finally, the most important one is that you will end up with third-party sellers outranking you in the SERPs, who will ultimately get that click and then get that conversion, and that is going to lead to a loss of revenue for your brand. So how can you ensure that you maintain consistency at scale? Well, there are a couple of ways that you can do this, but the most important one really is to make sure you have one centralized data source that syncs these 3 elements. So if you have something like a product information management system, this is great because you can pull information that sits in your CMS directly from that system. You can use that to then obviously pull through onto the page, and also to populate your schema markup as well. And then if you use sort of plugins, APIs, or product scraping to build your feed that sits as like your data source within Merchant Center, you can make sure that all of that information is consistent. And then if you are also optimizing your merchant feed with additional information, we would also recommend that you use a supplemental feed to do this. And this just means that you can basically apply any additional optimizations and add that directly to Merchant Center through a separate sheet. And then you're not having to tamper sort of with your data source, and that can remain your single one source of truth. So it's much easier to get those optimizations over the line. You can also use some tools to help you do this. So I really love Screaming Frog to crawl sites, and you can use the structured data extraction sort of setting within that tool to do a structured data audit at scale. And then you can also use cloud crawling to do this. So this is really good for scheduling crawls to run automatically so that you don't have to worry about remembering to do it yourself. And also it keeps the crawl off of your main machine. So it's not going to slow down anything that you're doing in your day-to-day or affect anything that you're doing there in terms of speed. There's also a lot of Google-owned properties that you can use to help with this. So Google Search Console has loads of information in their crawl reports. You can also view the merchant listings report specifically to flag any errors with your sort of schema setup. And then Merchant Center is going to be your absolute best friend here, because it will tell you straight away if there are mismatches between things like your feed information and also what sits in your schema, so you can go ahead and rectify those accordingly. Now, this next one kind of goes without saying, but it is really important to share data when you do this, because there are so many different teams that might be involved in this process. So you might have your product and merch teams sorting out the information that sits on your website. You'll have developers involved to produce the schema, and then you might have paid teams as well, sort of running the feeds for the paid ads. Then your SEO teams feeding into that as well. So if something changes somewhere and that information is not shared across teams, you are more than likely to end up with inconsistencies. So teamwork really, really does equal efficiency in this case. On to my third point. So we're going to get a little bit more technical now, and we're going to talk a little bit about rendering. So if the information is not in the HTML, then it is not guaranteed to exist in the eyes of a crawler. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the whole retrieval process, but there are two key versions of your website that a crawler might see. Now, the first is the HTML only. This is sort of as closely related as you can get to the hard code that is written by a developer, but it will contain some sort of scripts and overlays that won't have been executed at this point. Then once the browser sort of executes that JavaScript and applies any styling changes to the page, this becomes the version that is rendered with JavaScript. It's typically what a user will see, and this is what you will see if you were to use Chrome DevTools to inspect the page. Now, in 2026, search engines still might delay rendering for indexing. So there is definitely a thing such as the rendering queue, where search engines will execute or will crawl the HTML that sits on your website, but they will put anything that needs to be rendered into a queue. Now, it might sit in there for seconds, it might be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days. You get the idea. You don't know how long it's going to sit in there, but this means that for a period of time, crawlers are only going to see the more basic version of your site. So if you have any critical information that sits in that JavaScript, it's not going to get used for immediate indexing. Now, they might also skip rendering at scale, and they might only partially execute scripts. So if you have a particularly large script on your website that is taking a really, really long time to pass, a crawler might just bow out, abandon ship, and just stop crawling. So therefore, it is really important that if you have anything critical, you hard code it. Now, this is what search engine crawlers are doing, but as of right now, LLM user agents do not typically execute any JavaScript. So if you do have any of that information that sits in your scripts, while a search engine is likely to see it eventually, an LLM user agent might not ever see it. So you need to hard code what matters on your product pages. And on product pages, this is a lot of information. So it kind of goes without saying that critical elements would be things like your product name, your description information, pricing, canonical tags, all that stuff. But what is also critical is things like your internal linking, your shipping and returns information, add to cart buttons, and then still critical, things like images, reviews, related products, FAQs, all of that stuff that you would like a user to see, you must hard code if you want an LLM user agent to be able to retrieve that and send that back to a user in a chatbot. So the benefits of server-side rendering, which is using HTML, is you'll end up with faster crawling, much more reliable indexing, and you're therefore going to have a set of code that is primed for data extraction for all crawlers. Now, there is a really easy way to see what information on your website is relying on JavaScript, and you can do that just by navigating to a web page, right-clicking and inspecting the page, and using a shortcut to disable JavaScript. And you can then compare the before and the after to see what changes and what differs in the code specifically to find out what information might be key and might be only rendered through JavaScript. So Sigma Sports is a great example here because you'll notice, hopefully, that when I disable JavaScript, the content doesn't really change. All of their key information is still there, and that's because they have a really good rendering setup. If you had a site that was very heavily reliant on JavaScript, you might see something that looks a little bit like this, would be a blank page, not much in the code, and therefore it's going to lead to poor LLM retrieval. Now, my fourth point is internal linking through your site architecture. So poor linking definitely leads to discoverability issues. And this is because internal linking is still the single biggest and best method of URL discoverability for crawlers. This is something that hasn't changed for a number of years and probably won't change. And it's something that Google themselves have confirmed many times. If anyone is familiar with John Mueller, he has said this many, many times in his sort of like search hangouts. But it's also really, really important for LLMs and AI overviews. And this is because your LLM user agents don't use crawled data for every chat response. So there are two key methods for priority page retrieval that an LLM user agent might use when it's completing a chat with a user. Now, the first is index pages. So in this instance, a user might submit a chat request to the LLM, say it's ChatGPT or something else. The LLM will then go out and basically perform its own browser search. So it will use the keyword query data and any query fan-out information to scour the index for the top pages that appear for those queries. It will then sample those URLs and navigate to them, and then it will browse the content and break this down into chunks or embeddings, and then that's the information that will then get retrieved and sent back to the user. Now, these aren't site specific, so that's why if a user was to ask for information about a product from a particular brand, if you have other retailers or other websites that are referring to that brand or stocking that brand that appear in that top 10 list, they might also get retrieved as well. Now, the second method is through your menu navigation. So in this instance, the user agent is going directly to your website and it's going straight to the core menu navigation. So all the pages that you are telling it are a priority by putting them in your main menu navigation. It will then use sort of like URL patterns and folder structure to understand your website hierarchy. And it will also scan anchor text and content on the page to relate that back to the keywords and decide what to retrieve. Now, both of these methods heavily use internal linking, so it is really, really important that you get this right. So poor linking can lead to reduced discoverability. That will lead to diluted authority for your product pages, and therefore it is going to result in missed revenue opportunities. So there are a number of ways that you can prioritize product page linking in your site structure. Now, hopefully none of these are super new to anyone here. I'm sure that you guys will be familiar with some of these processes, but things like your catalog links from your PLPs to your PDPs and how that works with pagination, cross-selling modules between your PDPs and how you link to variants, and then things like carousels, image links, and in-text links that might appear on other related content like blogs or pillar pages. But what is essential to get right within these is you must prioritize canonical URLs and parent SKUs in that linking structure. So when you order your PDPs on your category pages by priority for, say, like revenue purposes or what you want buyers to see first, this is also going to feed into what a crawler will see first. So you need to make sure your priority pages sit on that page one. Now, you also need to make sure that the linked from pages are discoverable. So if you're linking to all your PDPs in all the right ways, but the pages that house those PDP links aren't discoverable, then crawlers still aren't going to get to them. So make sure your priority pages are in your menu navigation. And pagination is really, really important here, because if you are using like pages 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. to house all of your secondary products, but you canonicalize those back to page one, then a crawler won't be able to get to those pages and it therefore won't discover your other PDPs. So it's really important to use pagination best practice here as well. And then finally, use crawlable links. So kind of goes without saying from my last tip, but if your links aren't HTML rendered, they're not going to be discovered. And the best way to make sure that they are is to use Ahref tags, because these are tags that we know crawlers can follow to find pages that are linked to from your pages. Now, finally, don't neglect sitemaps. Now, these aren't strictly a method of internal linking, but they are super important for URL discovery. And it kind of goes without saying that you should link to things like canonical URLs only in your sitemaps, but there are also a couple of other things that you can do within these to make these work best for you. So if you are a brand that has a large number of products, it is a good idea to use multiple product sitemaps, probably just 2, and split out all of your priority PDPs into one single sitemap and have the rest in a secondary sitemap. This just enables you to have a bit of a better prioritization over the products that are discovered first. And then finally, last modified. This is such like an underutilized feed within sitemaps through SEO. But if you don't have a last modified field, or if you're just using, say, one blanket date to update this, then you're giving no indication to crawlers about what pages they should prioritize when they refresh your data. If you do use dates, then you're quite clearly giving signals to those crawlers that they should tackle those pages first and therefore update the data accordingly. So this is just going to work much better for you. So all of this can be rolled into something that I like to call the PDP maturity model, and this is just optimizing for data extraction. So your first layer is that you are crawlable. This is basically using all of those basics that I mentioned at the very beginning and making sure you've got those fundamentals in place. Then to move into the structured tier, you want to make sure you have unified product data and that you're using product group schema and that you have consistency between sort of that feed schema and on page. And then to become properly discoverable, you need to make sure you are using HTML rendering for critical content and you have strong linking pathways. So I've already gone over time, apologies, but just some final key takeaways. So PDP success is about more than just the basics. You need to get the foundations right and then build upon these to succeed. Establishing variant relationships is essential, and you can do this through the use of product group schema very easily. That schema should be consistent with the information that you share on the page and in your feed in order to have one source of truth and build trust between you as a brand and crawlers and users. Hard code what matters, because rendering does impact visibility. So you should make sure that you have all of your priority fields in your HTML if you want them to get seen by crawlers. And finally, internal linking drives discovery. So make sure you prioritize what you're linking to throughout your page in order to get the best out of your PDPs. Thank you very much.